Step into Pike Place Market, and you are immediately hit by a very specific kind of energy. It is loud, chaotic, and deeply romantic. The entire location leans on a century-old aesthetic. Cobblestone streets, dense floral displays, and weathered brick facades are carefully preserved to maintain the area's cultural status. But keeping a 1900s illusion alive in the middle of a modern metropolis requires a massive amount of hidden logistics. The historic vibe you feel walking through the stalls is a highly curated experience, and it is actively fighting against the spatial realities of keeping a modern city functioning. Walk to the perimeter of the market, and the romance vanishes. A major public destination requires modern infrastructure, specifically massive ADA-compliant elevator shafts and heavy parking garages. The necessary infrastructure is physically stark. It is built from heavy, unadorned concrete and dull utilitarian geometry. This creates what city planners call urban blight. Urban blight is the visual decay or degradation of a neighborhood, often triggered when imposing, highly functional structures create dead zones that discourage pedestrian traffic, which presents a serious problem for the designers. How do you integrate a massive concrete footprint right next to a historic landmark without destroying the surrounding immersion? Exposed concrete breaks the psychological spell of the market, placing the visitor squarely in a modern parking lot. The city's solution was to crown the gray tower with a massive, vibrant installation, and the sheer physical effort required to mount a sign of this magnitude onto an active construction site is immense. It takes heavy machinery, major capital, and careful engineering. In an era of cheap, highly efficient LED screens, why invest so much money and effort into fragile legacy technology? Modern LEDs are incredibly efficient at throwing light, but they lack texture. They cannot provide the tactile authenticity required to match a historic district's visual brand. The choice of medium is doing as much work as the sign itself. Deploying legacy technology bridges the visual gap between a cold, concrete present and a romanticized past. Let's zoom in to see how this specific piece of signage physically works to soften the concrete. These are channel letters, custom-made metal structures with deep frames, painted high-contrast red for sharp volume and heavy shadows. Tucked inside are delicate components, hand-bent neon tubes, exposed wiring, and physical standoffs connecting it all to the metal. The manufacturing process is a direct historical continuation. It still requires skilled labor to manually heat, bend, and test the luminous glass tubes by hand. This creates an organic, buzzing warmth from traditional neon, directly contrasting against the cold, perfectly straight vertical lines of the corrugated steel behind it. The sign functions as a piece of microarchitecture. It uses the deliberate friction of old-world craftsmanship to actively disguise industrial brutalism. This process relies heavily on visual magnetism. Visual magnetism is a design concept where architects place highly attractive elements in a space to actively control pedestrian attention. High-contrast red and bright neon pull the line of sight upward, physically hijacking the viewer's focus. By successfully drawing your focus up to the iconic typography, your brain effectively ignores the mundane parking structure directly below it. This is a deliberate continuation of an established visual language. The new tower applies the exact same strategy as the original historic market clock to anchor the street. It is the architecture of attention. You don't actually need to hide an ugly building if you can give the public something infinitely more interesting to look at. Wayfinding is a functional necessity, but placemaking is what turns a coordinate on a map into a destination. Placemaking is the process of transforming a public space to improve the quality of life and create a sense of local identity. Because of that neon installation, this specific elevator shaft has transitioned from a purely functional utility into a cultural landmark and a heavily utilized photo opportunity. The sign expands the magic boundary of the historic market, stretching it entirely over the unglamorous adjacent infrastructure. Strategic urban design takes the chore of finding a parking spot and turns it into a recognizable landmark in its own right.